So I'm going to talk to you guys today about doing dip pen calligraphy, which is something that I started doing after taking a class with Dame Linden at one of the symposiums. I can't remember which one. I think the one when we had Olympiad here. So prior to that, I had been using, I guess, regular calligraphy pens. So you can buy, just in terms of materials. Oh, this one's not going to show very well. But you can buy, turn that off. Oh man, this one's terrible. Calligraphy pens are just, usually think of it as like a flat head screwdriver type situation. Um, and you can do calligraphy with these without having to have dip pen and ink. But I run through them like crazy because I like to practice my text a million times before I put it on the good paper. So dip pens were a really great way to go to that for me. So those, you can buy them online from Amazon or whatever. I have Speedball. There's a bunch of different brands. Sorry. And they kind of behave differently. Some people like certain ones. There's right-handed and left-handed nibs. So this is a nib holder. Oh my God, I am so sorry, guys. This is a mess. And then this was a set with a whole bunch of different size nibs. And then I use Speedball Super Black ink. I can't remember. This thing was maybe like $15 for this entire thing of ink. Maybe it was a little more, but it's literally lasted me forever and it'll last you forever. I also, just in terms of materials and resources, I like to use a light board when I'm doing my calligraphy, and I print out calligraphy ruled paper. So I use, I guess it's blocklayer.com, but I feel like that one went away. We can come to it at the end, but you can look up online various places where you enter in the size you want of the lines. More traditionally, you can block it out yourself with your nib, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit, I guess. But so I print out the paper and then put it behind whatever paper I'm going to work on, and can use my light table to see my lines, and then I don't have to draw lines on my good paper when I go to put the words to my scroll. I'm sorry for all these ums and uhs. I guess something else to think about is kind of the layout of your whole scroll piece. I like to kind of come up with a rough wording of what I kind of want to say. They pretty much all, for me, say just about the same things, where it's, the Kingdom of Winter's Edge is giving this award, whatever that is, to this person for these things on this day, signed by my hand, whatever. And then I can play around with the exact wording to get it to fit into the space available. That's kind of the basics. You need ink, you need a nib holder, and you need a nib. The nibs come in different sizes, which are going to make different sized fonts. So, for example, this huge font was done with this nib. I don't know, this is terrible. Which was a size 0. And so when you're working on trying to figure out what size space you have to fit, you can adjust the size of your font essentially with a different size nib. So let's, sorry, I have this calligraphy book that I've had since I was in like middle school or elementary school, and I like to refer to it on the somewhat regular. Um, and it's really useful. So some of the big key things are having the right sized lines spacing. So you have ascender, that's the word. You have ascender, descender, and X height. So the X height is the just kind of base height of your letters, the like middle chunk. And you want that to be usually different. So the word for a different style font in with calligraphy is a hand. So different hands will have different recommended ascender, descender, and X heights. And the heights are typically measured in like a nib height. So you would take your pen and just draw straight across and make a little square. You want it to be really evenly, like just touching each other and straight across. So I don't know if y'all can see that, but so the ascender is 2 nibs high for my usual font. Then the X height is 4, and then the descender is 2. And then I do a line to line spacing of 4 as well. And so I will just go online and type in those measurements in millimeters into my an online thing, and then it'll spit out lines like this for me just on a piece of paper, and then I'll just keep that in the background and use it a million times. You can just print this out and then write on it directly, and you just need to print out more lined paper. Now, you can't really do that once you get to your final scroll, if that makes any sense. That's another thing to talk about is paper. So when you're doing dip pen calligraphy onto or for a scroll, ideally you want to have a kind of smooth surface. So I usually use Arch's hot press paper. So if you guys are kind of familiar with watercolor paper, it's like very textured usually. That's usually cold press paper. Hot press paper is smooth, and then your nib isn't going to catch in all those like hills and valleys. Not sure if I have any cold press paper here that I could demonstrate on. I don't think I do. But anyway, I guess something to kind of know about the nibs is they're made of these, it's a metal piece, and it's got 3 little lines of metal. This is terrible, you all can't see that. And when you press down, they kind of splay apart. I don't know if you can see. And you don't want them to kind of splay too hard. You want them to splay just a little bit. And they'll catch on rough paper, and everything will look really kind of jittery, which isn't what you're usually going for. Um, okay, so you have your paper, you have whatever it is you're wanting to write. I like to just practice on computer paper, just regular printer paper, because it's cheap and I have it around. You can practice on actual good paper if you want, but it'll get pretty expensive. And depending on how long it's been since I've done some calligraphy, or how comfortable you are with a given hand, it may take a while to get yourself kind of warmed up. And I highly recommend doing a warm up before you actually write like transfer onto the good paper. When I'm using the dip pen, I like to put my ink in a little container so that I'm not going to spill my whole big bottle of ink everywhere and make a giant mess because I tend to spill. Um, and I keep a paper towel around, and so I will, it, this probably seems so basic, but I'll dip my pen. You want ink to come up a good bit on your nib. Um, my nibs all have this top kind of gold looking piece that this kind of acts as a bit of an inkwell on your uh your nib, so it holds a good bit of ink in this reservoir between um the actual writing portion and this top bit. So you can write like an entire line without having to re-dip your pen. And then I get really irritated with getting ink all over myself, so I wipe off the nib holder. Um, and then before I write on my paper, I like to write on some scrap sheet just a few lines until my nib has like a smooth amount of ink and it's not kind of glopping everywhere. So like the over here and the were like my initial parts where I dipped, and you can see a whole bunch of ink like splooshed out. Um, I try not to worry too much about that when I'm doing my practice sheets because I know that that's going to happen. And when I go to transfer onto the good paper, I just will write like a single letter off on my scrap sheet before I start on the good paper. Um, so calligraphy in general is really just about mastering a few different shapes that you're going to see in your letters. So so the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog is just a kind of common practice sentence, I guess, because it uses every letter in the alphabet. And like, for example, my X here is absolutely terrible because I don't know that I've ever put an X on a single scroll. So that might have been the first time I've ever calligraphied an X in a long time. Um, and same with the Z. I don't often have a Z, and so it kind of looks like a mess. Um, I guess additionally, what I'm showing you here is my own personal hand, I guess. I don't use any of the like truly traditional fonts, if you will. You can look those up. There's a whole bunch of really great resources for examples of like historical calligraphy hands and what time periods they're from. There's a good Facebook group, Green Man Calligraphy, that you can join. And I don't think he's been doing any classes lately, but for a while he would do classes, and I think he has some recordings of different font practices and what have you. Um, but I just have kind of settled into a font that is comfortable for me, and so that's what I work with. But if you're looking at the letters, you'll notice that there's really not too many like revolutionary or different shapes. So N's and M's and I's all are doing this same short, no, uh, your ink will dry on your nib and then it won't write. So just re-dip your pen as needed. Um, you also have to keep your nibs clean and really dry them afterwards or they will rust. Um, so nib maintenance is pretty important. Um, I clean mine just with a toothbrush and soap, and then dry them really well, and then I will lightly wipe them with just rubbing alcohol to make sure they're really dry. Um, but anyway, so N's, M's, I's are just this simple slight uptick, pull straight down, slight uptick again. I don't remember the name of the little tick marks. But you can just practice just those individual strokes. An L would be the same but longer. And capitals will often do the same, and they're going to go up into the ascender. So this, I guess, I don't know if y'all can see, but so this is my like X lines here, and then this is the ascender line and the descender line. So another shape that you'll see is these kind of curves. So this would be for like an A or a C or a D. The other side of an O is the opposite, right? So you can just practice the individual shapes without practicing the whole letters, or you can practice whole letters and stringing the different shapes together. Another shape that I do is this kind of the squiggle of the S, right? So in here, and you can just practice those shapes to get comfortable with them. Sorry, I've totally skipped another part. Holding the pen is pretty important. So you want your nib to be at a 30 or 45-degree angle to your straight lines of your paper. So that's, I think, a 30-ish degree angle. I don't really do 45, I don't think. Yeah, 45 feels really weird. I think that's about 45. Yeah, that would be about 45. So the angle that's required will be different for different fonts. So I've just kind of settled into this 30-ish degree, and I just kind of eyeball it, to be honest. I don't ever really measure it, but you can measure it if that makes you more comfortable to get kind of used to it. And that is what's going to give you the kind of variation in width as you move through a shape. So like the upper part of the M, like, oops, running out of ink. Like this part's thinner, this part's thicker. And so having that, getting that angle comfortable and consistent is important. And then a couple other really important things is the spacing between letters and then the spacing between words. So ideally, you want your spacing between words to be pretty consistent, and your spacing between letters also to be consistent, and you want it to be so that you definitely know which letters go with which words, which sounds really silly, but if you've looked at any old um, illuminated manuscripts, you'll be like, oh, I see. Okay, yeah, I cannot tell where one word ends and another begins. And part of that was they'd smush as many things together as they could because paper was so expensive and valuable, or it was, made of animal hide and anyway. So they didn't want to waste any inch. I like my words to breathe a little bit more than that. You can also play with, I often do different sized words to draw different attention. So this ended up not being the scroll I used because I can't remember my husband pointed out that he felt like this tied hammer was kind of slanting down and that the ends were really weirdly spaced, and I couldn't unsee it, so I just redid it. And but it's a good example of where I used one size nib for kind of the more background words, and then used a larger nib to highlight Cabbage's name and then the night order that he was receiving with this scroll. You can also see here that sometimes like things aren't perfect. Like this February F, I think looks pretty ugly, but it is what it is. And you kind of just have to like roll with it and move on. Or grab a new piece of paper and do it again. And so here's another one. This one has become my like save paper go-to practice sheet. And it originally was going to be a scroll for Ruke, but I messed up known right out the gate. I don't know what I was doing, but instead of an N, I did K O, and then went, oh no, and tried to fix it, and then was like, I cannot deal with this being like the third word in, fourth word in, and already messed up. So turned it into a practice and redid that scroll, and now I paint on it and practice stuff on it to see how things will go and look. They also have different colored inks if you fancy doing that, that can make things really pop. So I also have this gold ink that I like. It's Dr. P.H. Martin's iridescent calligraphy ink. So that one's fun. Um, Trying to think what else I have missed. Let me go see if anybody's had any good questions yet. Okay, so Runa asked, if you don't have a light table, would you just draw lines? And the answer is yes. So when the hard part is when it comes to your good paper, um, which that just reminded me of something else I wanted to talk about on this. So it's kind of hard once you've drawn on the paper to really, really erase it all the way. But you don't want those lines to show up. So you can either draw them super light and then erase them really carefully, or do what I did and go to a art store and buy really nice erasers. And so I have a oh, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Anyway, I have like, it seems like a standard eraser. It kind of is, but it doesn't usually leave very much like white marks behind or marks behind. Um, and then this is my favorite eraser thing now. It's a Faber-Castell. Uh, it's this crazy, like almost putty stuff. And you can, so this is a darker pencil line than this squiggle than I would ever put on a piece of like art that I was going to do. But you can roll this on here and it picks up the graphite and really erases pretty beautifully without leaving a lot behind. So being able to erase the lines you've drawn on your nice paper is really helpful. And you can either measure them with a ruler, or you could use a window as a light table or whatever. There's a bunch of different ways you could trace if that's kind of what you're going for. Let's see. What other? I feel like I've like just dodged everything. Okay, Sethriel asked about flex nibs. I've never used flex nibs. So, or maybe I have. Not, no, I really haven't. They look super cool when I see videos of them on Facebook or whatever, that likes to feed me calligraphy stuff, which is nice. But I just have never tried them, but they do some pretty amazing things. So, like, if you have one or want to get one and try it out, like, go for it. It's going to do different stuff. It's not going to, it's more for modern fonts than some of the kind of traditional medieval style fonts. But, you know, you can let your creativity flow. Like, for example, some bad kerning on here. There's like my R and O right here are touching, but they don't touch anywhere else really. And then that's like, this was with no warm up. So this is an example of how like kind of sloppy to me things can look when you haven't warmed up at all. And then they can get better as you've warmed up and work on it some more. But kerning really makes a difference for uh, how together a word looks. Trying to think what was presentments. That was the word. There was a word on Runa's scroll that I had. oh my God, spelling without looking stuff up. And I had written it, I think, like this. And someone offered me the critique that presentments kind of looked like presentments because there was just a little too much space between my T and my M. And it could have been fixed by just extending things a little bit or scooching my M a little closer. But I was already on the good paper and done. So it is what it is. But honestly, calligraphy in general, it's just going to get better with practice. And something, or a couple things I just now remembered that I forgot to talk about. Um, Posture. So y'all can't see my posture, and honestly, it's a little terrible here. Most things recommend that you have a kind of elevated desk for calligraphy that you can set your angle at. And that kind of helps everything be more ergonomical. I just try really hard to not let my shoulders tense up to my ears, and to try to keep my hand relaxed or as relaxed as possible. Um, you also want to always pull the nib towards yourself. I can't believe I didn't say that earlier. Um, but you never, so you always are pulling the nib towards you. You're never pushing away. There's maybe some font where you push away, but y'all can't experience it until you get a pen and try it. But the pen fights this. You can maybe kind of see the vibration happening. But if you pull towards you, it's much smoother. That's how they're designed to work. And even when you're on curving shapes, you're pulling towards yourself. And then also, you don't want to press down too hard. So this is like you kind of want your hand to just have an even light pressure where you're moving your hand rather than like your fingers. So your whole elbow moves, like you pull your elbow towards yourself to do a really long line. Um, Whereas if you are just moving your hand, it's going to be a little wigglier and you're not going to have as even pressure on your nib. Um, and then also, I can try to show you guys with these dip pens. It's especially, let me show you with this nib. It's especially as you get the bigger nibs, really important not to push too hard because those splay a little easier. So, like this is pushing too hard, whereas this is kind of the pressure you want. So I don't know if y'all can see that, but you can see, or well, um, how if you're pushing too hard, you kind of sometimes will get a variable width, whereas if you stay with a nice even pressure, it stays more even. Um, Sorry that that's kind of gone off the rails. And then the last thing that I remember that I forgot to talk about is that different inks are going to behave differently on different papers. So on printer paper with this Speedball Super Black ink, I've found that I get a decent amount of what's called feathering. So like especially on like this O, you can see how the ink kind of feathers is like it gets caught in a piece of the paper fiber and just like wicks away. Whereas on the hot press paper, I don't ever experience that wicking. Um, it just kind of sits on top of the paper more. And so you'd be hard pressed on here to find any feathers. Um, it just kind of behaves a little better. But it also means sometimes my width of my wording, if I'm trying to like end up with a centered font, or like if I've designed my scroll to where the wording should be kind of center spaced on word, you know, um, you really have to do that knowing that the size, like the width of those words that you measured on your printer paper may or may not be exactly the same
Okay.
once you go onto good paper. Anyway, more questions? Yes. So for me, I always do the words, the calligraphy, and then do the painting. Um, Sometimes, like in the case of this cabbage scroll, I had already traced the design I was going to paint. But I kind of stopped doing that after this scroll because like it took so long to trace this thing, and then I messed up my calligraphy part. But calligraphy, you can even like a very long scroll, you can get that calligraphy written on the nice paper no more than 20 minutes. Um, Maybe a little longer if you're having to draw all your lines. Um, but the painting takes hours, right? So I would much rather have, and the mistake can be done like can be in seconds, right? Like misspelling, if you've been writing it a bunch, it's really easy for your brain to jump over a single letter. And it's also totally okay to like work around whatever mistake and just continue on. So I missed who it was that was talking about how they've like bound a book and like already painted the cover, and then they want to do nice wording on the first page as the text of the scroll. Um, take your time doing that. And if you make a mistake, just see if you can figure out a creative way to work around that mistake rather than throwing away all the effort you've already put in. So I usually let it sit overnight. It does not need that long. Um, Actually, I didn't let it, so like Runa, your knighting scroll. I weirdly did your knighting scroll and a scroll for Clover that he still hasn't received because he keeps not accepting this award. Um, I did those while I was at a quilt retreat with my quilting guild because that was the time I had to do this. And I let them sit over the course of lunch and then proceeded to work on the paintings. Another thing is when you're working, this is no one asked me this question, but when you're working on the painting part, so like this clover scroll as an example, I did all of the calligraphy. I then will take regular pieces of paper and put it over the calligraphy just to be an extra layer of protection for not smudging things with random, you know, if you get paint on your hand somewhere, you don't accidentally get it over your calligraphy or whatever. This uh, India ink is totally waterproof. Um, and so is actually the gold ink I have. I tried out different. I did a painting for my nephew and was playing with the calligraphy before or after painting. And anyway, you can in fact paint over the gold paint or the gold ink. It just didn't look as crisp as I wanted it to. So that's the only piece of art thus far I've done where I did the painting and then the calligraphy. And let me tell you, I was like so anxious while doing that stupid calligraphy.